Howdy, folks. Shell Presto here, awesome artist, remarkable writer, and undaunted luminary of my time. I'm here today with magnificent Mike DiBaggio and amazing Alexander Hellene to talk to you guys about writing and writing advice, what we think works, what we think doesn't work. And Alexander, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about Swordbringer?
Absolutely. So the Swordbringer, it's my second novel. Well, first, thank you for having me here, Shell and Mike. So it's my second novel. It's a planned sci-fi sword and planet trilogy with a bit of a religious spiritual bent, but nothing to bash anyone over the head with or try to convert people. The first book I published in September. I self-published it. It's called The Last Ancestor, and it's on a distant planet. There's a group of refugees, religious refugees from Earth, having to contend against a fierce race of dog-like, we can almost think of them of wolf-like humanoid warriors that do not like them. There is an uneasy peace that threatens to get broken, and the interesting part of all this is that the main character is a 16-year-old adventurous boy who happens to become best friends with one of the alien creatures, and it's about how they're trying to stop an all-out war, and they have some exciting adventures doing it.
All right. So one of the more interesting things that I've seen, you keep a lot of blogs. You blog quite often on Amatopia. Is that how you say it?
Yep.
And one of the blogs that I saw that I thought was very interesting was, lots of writers try to consider themselves, we'll say, experts on writing. And they're always trying to give advice or telling people how to, write a certain way or not write a certain way. And there's like all these rules that a lot of people want to impose. And it was quite refreshing to me when you said that your best advice was, well, I'll let you take it.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked the article. And one thing I tend to say a lot is that I don't think there's any group of people that likes to talk or write about what they do as much as writers, myself included. And sometimes I need to stop doing that and get back to work. But your point, you nailed the point that I made in that article, which is a lot of people have methods and a lot of writers like to give advice to others, to give a handout. I firmly believe that this is sincere because I've seen a lot of people actually impart some helpful advice. But for my own part, I'm way too ramshackle in how I approach it to give any kind of systematic writing advice other than you just got to sit down and do it. That sounds very trite, but I will give the second piece of writing advice that I kind of feel qualified to give, which is something I picked up from Jim Twitter feeds I like to follow, which is give it 10 minutes, set a timer for 10 minutes, and get started. It doesn't matter what mood you're in or how much you've prepared. And if you're still going after 10 minutes, great, keep going. If the 10-minute timer goes off and you're not enjoying yourself, just cut it out. But other than that, I find a lot of attempts to systematize the writing process almost counterproductive, if that makes sense.
No, I totally get that, especially when, the thing is, I think that a system definitely can help you if you don't know what you're doing at all. But a lot of times it can take a lot of the surprise or the refreshment out of doing your own thing. And I know that Mike, who is the author of our Ascension Epoch books, has another big piece of writing advice that he recommends, which I'll let him do.
Sure. But before I get into that, I want to say about the writing system. I found as someone who has tried very extensively to bang out 10 to 15,000 words a day, which would or more, which would be the holy grail. of a writer to consistently do that. But having rarely been able to write more than 2,500 words a day out of an extreme slog, I think that one thing the writing systems have against them is that if you are if they're not flexible enough, and like say your writing system is, I'm going to write, I'm going to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and write till noon without stopping. Anytime you have any interruptions, anything unexpected that would happen, things that are otherwise known as life, your system kind of breaks down, and you can't do that anymore. But I certainly agree with Alex and everybody else. I mean, this is this is a long time. This advice is given out by every successful writer, and that really it's no different than anything else you do in life. You have to do it, and you have to keep doing it until you're finished, and then you have to also be willing to finish it. But the similar piece of advice that I would give, and this was a hard time. I had a hard time realizing this as well, because when I first started writing books, and all right, I won't call them books because they weren't published, but writing stories as a middle schooler, I didn't realize how important it was to read first before you write, because if you don't know already what's good before you start writing, you're not gonna. I think the odds are against you magically discovering it yourself. So I think one of the hallmarks of a really excellent, accomplished writer and a successful writer is someone who also reads a lot and has read a lot in the past. And Shell knows that we often field questions from people that approach us at conventions, and they see that we're independent creators, and they say they ask us how we get into it, how we are able to finish a book, how we publish, and all this other stuff, and they start talking about their stories. And one of the hallmarks that we always hear of people who are never happy with their writing or have never finished anything is that they don't read. And that may be a surprising thing for a lot of people to hear, but there are a lot of people who think that they can just jump into writing without reading, reading in general, but especially reading good stuff, because you learn best, I think, in this field often by emulating others in addition to your craft.
All right, folks, just so you don't think we have a lurker who's not talking here, we also have astonishing ArtAnon on with us today. He's actually the guy that drew the image you're looking at that I am coloring. And I hadn't said it previously, but this is from the Alexander Hellene Swordbringer book. So go ahead, ArtAnon, jump right in.
Okay, thanks, Shel. I think that what Mike is talking about is true with just about anything that you're going to do. Okay.
All right.
So let me just start over again.
Yep.
I think what Mike is saying is true for a lot of artistic endeavors. The ability to actually do comes from doing. We've had discussions, I think, in other fora about how do you break into a certain regime or a certain area where you want to do work. Well, part of it is you need to do the work. You need to let's play the imitation of Christ. You need to imitate what you think is right, take the feedback, and then enhance what you do with that feedback. You've got to work at it, but unless you actually do it, unless you actually kind of jump in with both feet or even head first, you're never going to know if you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that if I may, that well, like Mike said, I think another part to just add on to what he said real quick before going on to respond to your point, ArtAnon. What Mike is talking about, you need to read read what's good. You have to learn discernment. It's not just read what's good. You need to be able to tell what's good and what's not, what works and what doesn't. Not just in what you read from other people's work, but in your own. If you're writing something, you need to be able to say to yourself, this is awful, and just completely cut it without any kind of consternation. But to get to your point, ArtAnon, I think that's another bit of advice I feel qualified to give, besides just sit down and write, which is also, you have to fail, and you're going to have to fail many times, because you can get into the paralysis of over preparation. I mean, we all know that person who says, I'm gonna get fit this year, or I'm gonna save money to buy this or that, or I'm gonna improve this aspect of my life, and they'll read all the books and the websites, and they'll listen to the podcasts, and then you get in touch with them 6, 8, 10 months later and ask them how they're doing, and they're like, oh, I haven't even started yet. That project, I'm gonna get to it. It's not ready yet. Perfection, definitely, forget becoming the enemy of the good. Perfection becomes the enemy of creation. So your point about having to jump in, I think, is totally key. That prevents so many people from getting anywhere. They don't want to. They want it to be perfect the first time out, and it never is.
And I think that the 2 points play together. That unless you start doing something, you're never going to be able to really say, oh, I do need to go back and look at this reference, or talk to these people who were warning me about this is going to be a challenge for you. Unless you start doing it, you're never going to realize what you don't know. And there's so much you usually don't know when you're starting.
Right.
A classic, failure, as you say, is just don't start. You're always prepping. You're always getting ready. You're always, and sometimes looking for outside influences that are holding you back, instead of saying, well, what are the things that are holding me back?
I think the funny thing about just starting is Mike and I actually had this experience where, you wonder if you're good enough, and you wonder what you're doing. And, Mike and I would go to cons, but we weren't selling our own things. We were just going as attendees. And I think it was Pittsburgh Comic Con we went. And, we bought...
It was Steel City Con in the first part of 2014.
Okay. Well, you know this story, so go ahead, Mike.
Sorry, let me apologize to the audience first, because I have a bit of a cold and it's affecting my voice, but I'll try to speak as clearly as possible. But yeah, we went just as attendees, as Shell said, and we went through Artist Row and saw all these independent creators there. And not to be, and I don't mean this in any insulting way or anything, but we have been working on our stuff for we have been world building and writing little bits here and there for a long time. And when we got there and we saw these other people that had tables there, and we said, if most of these people are ready, if they're ready to put their stuff out, and a lot of it was in very unfinished form. They had very early stage work. Some of it was literally just ideas, and they had like little sketches and little stories that they printed out and stapled together. We said it took that to convince us that we should do this too. And really, before that day, we had never thought about actually doing it.
Well, and I think the other important thing was that, that there were people with various stages of things in work. There were people with, issue 1 of their comic and it was only 12 pages, or there were people, selling, books that, weren't particularly well edited, but maybe the writing in it was good anyway. There was all these different levels that were selling it, and the thing is, people were buying it too. That there's an audience out there, so long as you're willing to, be open to feedback and start putting stuff out there too.
Yeah. That brings to mind just a quick but related aside. I don't know if I know you know him, ArtAnon, but the author Adam Lane Smith, he was a big help to me when I was getting ready to put out my first book, and he said that one thing that really got him motivated to finally get started was he read a sci-fi book by a somewhat luminary, big publisher, a big pub author that he had heard so many things about, and I won't share it. He was reluctant to share it with me, but he read that, and then that he said is what lit the fire under him. He said, if this book, which is terrible, is selling and people love it, he's like, there's literally nothing that should stop me from thinking that my story or my writing isn't good enough. And that kind of reminds me of your story a little bit, to a bit more of an extreme degree. But
I mean, Twilight's the big example. It's like, a vampire book where the vampires sparkle, and like, it's absurd, and it sold a lot. So it's like, well,
even more so than Twilight, the fact that 50 Shades of Grey, which made its author a billionaire, I think, was started as Twilight erotic fan fiction. So that's scraping the barrel as low as you can go.
Yeah. Never think your erotic fan fiction isn't good enough, basically.
Oh, dear Lord.
Well, Alex, I wanted to ask, how old were you when you first started getting into writing stories? And did you? Is this something that you started more recently, or is it something you've been doing as a kid?
Well, this probably started. I started to try to write fantasy novels around the age of 12 or 13 because I loved J.R.R. Tolkien. I loved Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, who wrote a bunch of books, not just the they did the Dragonlance Prince series, I believe, but they did other. I really liked the Dark Sword. I think they did that one, and they did they did another one that took place in like a desert setting. I can't remember the name of, but that's all. And I like Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time a lot, and Tad Williams, that kind of fantasy, the stuff from the 60s up until the early 90s. That got sidetracked when I started really getting into music, and I did that for most of my teens and 20s, trying to make it go as a musician, but I still read a lot. But I also always read a lot of the classics and literary fiction. So when the whole music thing wound down around the time I was about 27 or 28, that's when I finished my first novel, which is a 1,000-page kind of crime detective story that would never be published because it needs a lot of work. And I really just cranked out novels in a variety of genres, pretty much from, I think I was 27 or 28 when I finished the first one. And I published my first book, A Traitor to Dreams, in December of 2018, which would have made me 37. So between then, I probably wrote about 8 novels before publishing one. So it's something that I've always wanted to do ever since I was a young boy, and I finally got around to do it as I enter into the early years of middle age, as I like to tell myself. I'm still in the early years.
Trust me, you guys are all there. You guys are all there.
Yeah, okay? We are.
So don't try to age yourself out faster.
I'll get there eventually.
So it's very interesting that you say you wrote a novel, and several novels, in fact, and never published them. That's a hard pill for a lot of aspiring writers, say, who haven't published anything to swallow. Not just, and I'm not even saying that for say that they shouldn't publish them, but how do you make that easier to? How do you smooth that over for people that say they want to be a writer, but they really don't want to? They will reply back, and we actually had this conversation yesterday with someone that if it's going to take them that long to do it, if they have to write thousands of pages to get at a point where they would be even remotely satisfied with what they're writing, that it's not worth doing.
Oh, wow. How do you get somebody to kind of overcome the discouragement, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's might be a bit above my pay grade. I think I had a little bit of an advantage, I think, just because I did music and performance from a young age, and you go in front of professors and teachers and judges, and you have these auditions, and if you're bad, you're bad, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and you just have to keep practicing. I guess if somebody has something like that in their background, maybe any kind of sports or competitive or competition or hobby or thing that takes a lot of time to do, you can liken it to that. But specifically writing wise, I think I just thought of this now because this is what I tell myself all the time. A lot of those old ideas, nothing stops you from going back and revisiting them when you are ready. I have a lot of what I want to publish after I get this trilogy done. I have 2 books that I want to go back and revisit. One of them is the book that I thought I was going to publish first before I published The Trader to Dreams, but I got it back from my editor, Brian Niemeyer, and I realized it needed a lot of work, and I didn't think I was up to the task yet, so I focused instead on a shorter thing I was working on. But I fully plan on going back and, if not rewriting from scratch, at least working on that manuscript. So I think one bit of practical advice is that nothing says you can't go back to those older works that you had, and spruce them up, fix them up. But the idea that you can emerge fully formed as a writer of great distinction and skill and talent that everybody's going to love. It's just as ridiculous as thinking you're going to be Tom Brady the first time you pick up a football and chuck it to your buddy in the backyard. You just, no matter what you do, you just have to put the reps in, put the work in, and there's no such thing as an overnight success.
Right.
It sounds so trite, but I don't know how else to put it. Really.
No, I think that's something that anyone who's realistic with themselves knows. But it's hard. It's hard to accept that, even for those who are realistic. And I think there's a lot of people that, for whatever reason, are not willing to be realistic with themselves. And it's a shame, because we've encountered some people, I think, Shell, that actually have sparks of something very potentially good in them. But then when we've offered some of them feedback, and they take it in a very, and I'll say this is not unsolicited feedback either, usually, and yet they take it they're taken aback from it, and they recoil from wanting to go back into it. But Alex, I thought it was interesting that you brought that up, and you don't have to go into this. I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but would you be willing to talk about it? You said you wrote a book, you got some response back from your editor, and that it would take a bunch of work. And how did you accept that? Was it like a hard blow for you to take, or?
It was a bit of a hard blow, and I don't mind talking about that at all. It was so this book, it was a historical fiction kind of horror fantasy. Clocked in around 800 some odd pages. I actually did multiple revisions myself before sending it to Brian, and I thought it was ready for prime time. And I think I lucked out in that he's a very good editor, and that he doesn't just do the line edits and a couple of plot things and say, oh, you might have a plot hole here or there. He does a lot. He gave me like 20 pages of notes, and it was one part was a big discussion about the flow of a story. And it was a bit of a hard pill to swallow, because of all the things that I had written before that, this was the one that I really felt was ready. And he made a lot of really good suggestions that would have just pushed the timeline of getting anything published. I mean, I'd probably still be working on it now with the level of experience that I had and the level of confidence that I had, quite honestly. So it was a hard blow, because it's always a hard blow to be rebuked, even if it's in a very professional, cordial, and helpful way. You know, his suggestions, his edits, criticism was done in the spirit of helping to make me a better writer, and I think that helped the most, because you got to give things a couple days to sink in. You might not want to look at it right away, then look at it later, and then you really think about what this person is telling you and why you failed. And I think looking at why you failed at this or that can help you do better on the next one. And it sounds so trite. I don't have any really clever, pithy way to put all these things, but you just got to put it behind you and move on to the next one. Put your head down and just keep moving. Let the past be the past, and just don't worry about it. Otherwise you keep it in you like an anchor, and you're never going to get anywhere.
I don't think it's trite though. That's just it. I think it's really critical that you take a look at when people are trying to offer you good advice, where it's productive criticism or constructive.
And you asked for it.
Yeah, and you've asked for it. Then they're giving you their experiences to help you avoid stepping into a pit. I really it's taken a while. I've talked to Mike and Shell about this a little bit too, especially Shell, since we're the art people.
Right.
I know she's given me criticism on my art when we first met, and she was kind of, I don't know if you're really hesitant on it, Shell, but you said, well, I don't want to offend you. It's like, rock on, give it to me, because I really have worked hard over a lot of years to say, I got to take the ego out of what I do.
Yeah.
If I'm really going to be a craftsman, if I'm really going to have the skill to do what I want to do, I have to be able to say, I need to judge, is this person qualified to give me advice? If so, then shut the heck up and listen and take that advice. So I think Shell's got out of that mode of, I don't want to insult him. In many respects, unless you're trying to be nasty to me or be mean, I'm not going to take it as an insult. Oh, that line doesn't look right there. The perspective's off. Got it. Let me go back and take a look at it and see if I can fix it. Let me see if I can make that drawing better. But if you don't take your ego out of what you do as you're trying to become a craftsman, you'll never move forward.
Yep. It's really hard to take your ego out of it, right? So is there any advice that you can give any kind of creator on how to do that?
I don't know if I can tell you exactly how to do it, but I really try to get into the mindset of, again, if I trust or respect the individual who's talking to me and giving me that criticism, I just kind of shut down on my, well, no, I don't believe. It's very much like active listening in many respects. Suck it all in. Okay? Just give me everything. Get clarification. Ask clarifying questions on what you're telling me about that artwork, that writing, that whatever it happens to be. Help me understand better where I've made a misstep in your estimation. Then you've got to take that data and you've got to chew it up and as honestly as possible say, is that criticism valid on what's going on here? It may well be that maybe it isn't valid criticism. Maybe it's 100% correct. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle. But you've got to chew it up. You've got to swallow it and make that part of what you do to be better.
I think that's a really important key to, that there's times you're going to present something to someone. It could be anything. It could be a piece of writing, a piece of art, a piece of music, anything. You present it to someone and they say, this is awful. This is the worst thing ever. I hate this. And you don't want to hear that, and you're going to recoil from it. But the big thing is you need to, grit your teeth and ask why. You need to find out why they think that. And I think that, how to put it? Well, I'll use, I always use my poor mother as the example, but it's true. My mom hates sci-fi. She hates horror. She hates,
hates anything we write.
Yeah. And she pretty much hates anything I draw, and it's not a reflection of me. I mean, it's, she's my mom, she loves me, but it's just not her bag. So the other thing is, when you have something, like if you have something and you think, oh, I want to publish this, or I want to go forward, or I want an opinion, is this piece of writing good? And you hand it off to a friend or your mother or another writer that that said they'll look at it. You have to stop and ask yourself what their perspective is on it. Because if you hand your sci-fi novel to a romance writer or someone that likes romance books or something, they may hate it just because they don't like the content of it. That's not their genre, that's not their subject. they might hate fight scenes, and your thing is chock full of fight scenes.
Yeah.
But there may be stuff, and you have to look carefully at what they say to you, because they may still be able to have some little pieces of gold to offer you. Maybe they say something on, how the captain of the ship interacts with the crew. Those character interactions. They may still have something good to offer you on that. So you have to just go through the criticism and pick out grains of sand and see, what is the thing that's useful here, because it may be useful and it may not be, and you have to sort through that.
Yeah, be that 49er panning for gold, because in every criticism you get, there's bound to be at least one nugget that you can use. Even the negative stuff helps you figure it out. Again, if it's really honest criticism, even the negative stuff helps you figure out how to be better.
Yeah, and back to a point you made, ArtAnon, you also have to consider the source too, because like you said, if it's a qualified individual, again, whether or not it's the same, necessarily someone from the same genre or whatnot that you're working in, or however you want to put it, it does, I'm sorry, and that might sound a little snobby, but depending on who is giving the criticism, that also does lend credence and weight to what they have to say. If it's just some bozo on the internet, like, you suck, one
You're
star.
absolutely right.
Who the heck are you? Who
Yes.
are you? What do you know? But if it's somebody that knows what they're talking about, and that you respect them because you're aware of what they can do, and they actually have something to teach you. Well, I mean, that you suck 1 star might it might ring a little truer.
Yeah, if I can offer any advice in being able to accept criticism, it's exactly that. It's one, ask people who you already respect and that you trust to give you honest information. And that again, this does not seem like earth-shattering revelatory advice, but a lot of people will go out there and they'll just throw it out to the public, or they'll throw it out to people they barely know, or that they actually don't respect their taste or their opinions, and they'll say, "What do you think of this?" And they will get feedback that sometimes at least that, yeah, and some that they won't like it, and they'll say, well, the hell on you anyway. Okay, and that's fine, and you may be right to say that, because there's completely times when you'll receive a criticism that's invalid, or you don't, or even you don't agree with it, and you may be right. That can totally happen. But if you go asking people who you don't trust and who you don't think are able to give you a good opinion anyway, it's your own fault. But I see writers do this all the time, or they'll get really bent out of shape by some random some troll's comment on like a YouTube video or Amazon or something like that. And if I can give a particular example from our own books, when we were writing, go ahead, Shel.
I was going to say, I think you should start by saying that we this particular book is generally highly regarded among sci-fi and fantasy fans. So, because you're going to be talking about Population of Loss, right?
No, actually, I'm not. I was going to talk about Copper Knights and Granite Men.
Oh, okay.
So when we first wrote Copper Knights and Granite Men, we shipped it out to our writer friends who we respected because they also wrote superhero novels. This would be Richard Rowland and Ben Fian, who write the grapple gun novels. And they had one book out already, and we had talked a lot about, we were well trusting of their comic book superhero, expertise.
Right.
And they responded as like, this is pretty good, but you have this one character here who seems like a Chekhov's gun, and really by not doing anything with her, the story suffers, and it leaves me feel like you just left it off. And when I got that back, I was like, no, I wrote that scene to be funny, and Shel will tell you, I was mad at them, and I said, we were walking on work because Shel and I worked together at the same time at this time. I was like, they're focusing on that, and really they weren't. I was making a big deal out of it, but over time, like over a couple days, I thought about it, and I was like, okay. And I said to myself, you ask them for a reason. They know what they're talking about and other things. they're probably right. And I sat down and I said, are they right? And I came to the conclusion, yes, they are right. And then we actually ended up writing another scene that actually sets up the course of probably the next several novels that we wouldn't have otherwise even thought about doing without that feedback. On the other hand, with that same book, there was also this blogger who was looking for people to send them their books so that he could tear them apart while he was on his treadmill or something. And seriously, that was his thing. He would read them while he was on his treadmill and then say how far he got into it. and we thought, oh, he had some sort of readership, and we had like zero readership at the time. Like right now we have just above zero readership, but back then we had zero. And so we thought, oh, any attention at all is good. And this guy shredded the book because of how we set out the M dashes, and I'm not making this up.
Wow.
He said like proper M dash has no space at the end. Or the other way around, whichever way it was, right?
Yeah, it was the proper M dash has no space. And the thing is, I like the way that the British use M dashes, so it is proper usage for M dashes. It's just British style.
Well, I don't think we have to defend our how we set up the M dash, but the point of it was, and he was like, I stopped reading at this M dash thing, and
where did the M dash hurt him? Jeez.
well, it's pointy on two ends, so one of those.
And that's obviously a case where you could say, well, F this guy. What does he know about it, right? Why did I even give it to him in the first place? And it was our fault for doing so. But anyway, I think that's the key is if you don't throw pearls before swine, right? So which is to say, expect bad feedback sometimes. Just expect somebody to say, because especially in the beginning, you're probably not good enough.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alex.
No, I was gonna say, I mean, that's true. And I guess a lot of that just comes from experience, especially in the world of the internet. You never know what kind of hang-ups I guess people have. Although maybe your story has the opposite of the intended effects, because now I kind of want to find this guy and send him one of my books just to see what he comes up with.
It's a fun experience.
Well, you know too that in terms of criticism, there are people who like to tear it down because they want to make it funny, and that's the thing is they're trying to elevate themselves.
They live for it, yeah.
Right, but I think a good critic, a good critic in the true and honest sense of the word, will also not shy away from telling you what you did right, because sometimes, because of how fragile the human ego can be, everybody's ego, but especially nowadays, where a lot of people grew up never being told that anything they did wasn't great, is that you have to sometimes help them find stuff that is good, or what. Sometimes you have to tell people really what they're interested in, because they will, they find that they're starting a novel because they like, say, romance, right? But they don't, and that's what they really want to write, but they've really got into this, they're in over their head with this political intrigue and technical stuff that they thought had to go in there because this other book they like had it in there, and that maybe you can point out to them that they do this one thing well, maybe you should focus on that. So I think it's also helpful to think about as you're writing, how to critique other people, and how to suggest things to them, because one thing that can help you grow as a writer is getting in a group of other writers that care about each other's work and like reading each other's work and like giving honest feedback, like the Inklings, like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and several others. They had a group that they met with regularly, shared each other's stories, and really sometimes savagely tore them apart, but they're all for the better of it.
You make a really good point. Sure, can you hear me right now again? All right, perfect. I was saying you hit upon a really good point, which was how much of this is cultural or generational.
That's
I don't
my
want
job.
to be
That's my job.
old cranky guy, going on and on about snowflakes. But but how much of this comes from never being told, no, that's not right, you're wrong, or you have to do this, and just being coddled for so long. That's a really I didn't think of that till you mentioned that.
I'm going to throw this out there, and I'm going to say it, or I'm going to ask it specifically because I know Mike's read a couple of books, and I know ArtAnon is fond of Lester Dent. But let's say that let's say I'm a new writer. I don't have anything to show anyone yet to ask for, feedback or anything. I'm starting from scratch, but I want to know about writing. Are there any particular like writing books or authors that give advice that you guys, would recommend if you're completely starting from scratch and you don't know what you're doing? And Alex, if you want to take it, or if you need a moment to think about it more, just to pass the buck to someone else.
Sure. So as far as writing method goes, I'm going to answer, then I'm going to pass the buck, because I've actually never read a book about writing methods, even though I've been told 100 times I really need to read Stephen King's On Writing book. So I'm more than comfortable saying I'm ignorant about this topic, and I'd love to hear what the rest of what ArtAnon and Mike and you shall have to say about this.
All right, I'm going to go next because my answer actually mirrors yours quite a bit. And it's not that I haven't read any particular writing method books that it's not that I haven't read any books on it. It's that I'm actually the English major in this group. I think I'm the only person here that majored in English literature.
Yeah.
Okay.
I sure didn't.
Yep, not me.
I majored
Negative.
in English literature and took a bunch of writing courses in college. So I was made to read a lot of books on writing. And to be honest, none of them resonated with me. And I often find writing within a method very, very restraining. So I kind of go out of my way to not listen to writing books, especially on methods. But one that I do particularly like, and Mike also might mention this one, is a particular book called How Not to Write a Novel. And it's less about a method and more a way to look at what you've written and ask yourself, am I doing this, and should I be doing this?
It's a semi-humorous take, but it's well worth. It's actually well worth reading for the comedy value, because it's written by two editors that are giving lightly fictionalized accounts of stories that they've been asked to edit.
And like one of my favorite things in it, and it's so simple, but there are so many authors, and sometimes I'm one of them until I got this book and really stopped. But you get these books, you get tips, you get better. One of them is, do you know what this word means? And the little insert on it is how to tell if you know what a word means. When you write a word in a sentence, stop and ask yourself, do you know what this word means? If the answer is no, go look it up.
Actually, it says if the answer is no, you do not know what this word means.
And I've also, I was an editor for 5 years at a newspaper, so it's stuff like that I see it all the time, and sometimes you don't even think about it, and I think it's a good thing. Especially, it's an interesting book because it's good both for new writers that have no clue what they're doing, and it's also a book for experienced writers who think they know everything of what they're doing, but they could just use tips here and there to improve what they're already doing. So, Mike or ArtAnon, figure out which one of you two wants to go next.
ArtAnon, why don't you go?
Okay, you're right. I do like the Lester Dent method because I think it matches with comic books a little bit more than some of the other writing methods I've seen, and I haven't seen a lot. My take on, if you like to write, much like if you'd like to do comic books, find something you enjoy reading. Find something that matches up with you. So, yeah, Lester Dent, I actually did a little bit of illustration when I was reading those books the first time of Doc Savage and his team. It was a lot of fun drawing out some of those scenes and trying to figure out, so how would I put this into a comic book? Some writing, when I'm doing that, when I'm seeing, can I translate this to a graphic format? It's just so clear seeing those images. Just boom, they're right there. others, it's thinking about what would this look like. 1984 was a book that I enjoyed doing the what would this look like, because it really didn't have a lot of action to it.
Yeah.
But it was one of those, Shell, you'll know what I'm talking about. It was a Wood 22.
Yeah.
How do I make the conversation look interesting when I've got two guys in a room talking to one another?
What ArtAnon is referring to is Wally Wood's 22 panels that always work, and it's a way to take particularly conversation-heavy scenes where there's no action going on and make them visually interesting, often by changing up the perspective or the shading and things like that.
Yeah, I've seen that floating around online. It's pretty brilliant, actually.
Yeah, Wally Wood was a pretty amazing guy.
He did Mad Magazine also. That's one thing I like about him, because I was always a big fan of Mad Magazine.
Yeah, and actually prior to that too, the same people who did Mad Magazine eventually they were doing a lot of the comics that got caught up in the Wortham hearings.
Yep. I love it.
And the one thing I do want to say that I think is good, ArtAnon works on comic scripts, is that his big thing is open with action, and that it makes for good splash pages. But you also see a lot of movies that follow that formula.
Yes, movies tend to follow that formula, especially if you're talking about action movies. Get you into the action right away. And I've seen a lot of writing is very similar to that. A lot of the independent science fiction, adventure, fantasy that I'm reading these days tends to open up. It's right there. First paragraph, boom, you're doing something. There's things happening around you, or you know that there's a tension in the character and their situation from that first paragraph, that first page. You're already sucked into it.
Alex mentioned Stephen King, and I don't know if this is in his book on writing, but I know he said that he sometimes spends almost as much time on crafting the opening sentence of a novel as he does on writing the whole thing. But by that I don't mean that he literally sits there for days staring at the screen. I mean, he'll write something and then go back and change it over and over and over again to really get that first punch that grabs the reader, and that's very important, because you can lose. You can lose readers very quickly, even if the story ends up being really action-packed. If you don't get into it, if you don't get into any kind of stakes or any kind of interest until 10 pages in, they may never get that far.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's interesting. You mentioned that, and that kind of, if I can, dovetail into something else, that kind of goes into a bit of criticism I got from some early readers of my first book, because with that one, it doesn't start out with there's stakes and there's tension. It starts out with the main character. She is escaping a bad date, and so it's not earth-shattering stakes, but I just couldn't for the life of me figure out how to begin this particular novel, this particular story with action, because it just
it's hard.
It just wouldn't work. It's about a woman who gets kind of drawn into this parallel dimension, and I don't know. I mean, I was like, some early
Alex,
readers were like, "Yep."
Say the name of your book.
Oh, sorry. It's my first book. It's called The Traitor to Dreams. I published it about 13 months ago now. And she gets pulled into this parallel world. And a couple early readers were like, well, you could start with her there, and then you could flash back to how she got there. But flashbacks, I don't know, you got to use those sparingly. And so I kind of rolled the dice, and I said, instead of doing one of those kind of start with the action, and then you're going to think of it like a movie, you're going to have the record skip and the soundtrack stop, and like, this is me. You're probably wondering how I got here type of thing. I just rolled with it from the beginning and did it chronologically. But, I had one reviewer was like, I liked the book, but it took forever for stuff to happen. So,
and I don't think
you took that to heart. I took that to heart, and I tried to correct that going forward.
I would say that another thing to keep in mind is that there's no such thing as a rule in any sort of artistic endeavor that can never be broken. So, like when we say action, it doesn't literally have to be people shooting each other, getting punched in the face, or thrown off a building. Your book may not have any of that. There's plenty of very good books that aren't loaded up on violence and explosions and stuff, obviously. But like there's probably some way, and it's hard. It's totally hard to write something where that will maybe you need humor, maybe you need something mysterious, maybe you need to hint at danger or say something in a way that can be interpreted multiple ways, and anything that piques you can think of it in terms of like a clickbait blog post or clickbait YouTube video, or where you're suggesting something, and now you don't want it to be actual clickbait because you want people to feel a payoff from it, but you need something to hook them.
You need to.
I like that though.
You need to deliver on your promise.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I think that what I'll say, Trader to Dreams, Alex, was I enjoyed that opening because other people may have thought it was long. That's fine, but I enjoyed kind of getting a little bit of a snapshot into her head, the running dialogue when she's talking to herself. Am I doing the right thing? Is this a good thing? Well, it's what I'm doing. It was very, I think, emblematic of someone who is a little bit questioning what they're doing, not only in the short term, but in the long term. I think it did a nice setup for the character. And for me, dropping that character into the world you eventually take her into, it helped me with the book. Because I think if we were in that world, I would have had a little more difficult time distinguishing your main character from other characters. What's the importance of this person? Why am I caring about this? So I'll give you that contrary analysis that I liked the way you had set that up in your first book.
That's really interesting to hear, and I'm glad to hear it because that was my thinking. And I know there's a lot of writers will say you do whatever works for the story, and I guess like I said, I gambled that instead of starting up with a bang, I'm going to do what I thought worked best for the story. And it's funny you mentioned the running dialogue though, ArtAnon, because my editor on that one, it was Jaggy Lamplighter. She said, I need more internal dialogue. Why can't we need to know more of her head? So you can all the credit goes to her, I would say. But that's interesting to hear you say that.
Well, let me toss this out here, and yes, it's going to sound sexist, and maybe it is. I don't care. You've got a female character as your main character in that book, and I think it's much more important for the female character to understand what's her rationale, because that internal monologue for women, I think in general, is a much more powerful thing than the internal monologue for many men.
You know what's funny? That's why I wanted a female editor for that book. To see if I was being, to see if I hate to say got it right, but to see if I was approximating a female character. And she's the sole point of view character in that book. And I wanted to know, am I off the mark? Am I being insulting? Am I overdoing it? This or that? So again, really interesting that you say that.
Well, based on my interaction with one female for over the last couple of decades, I'd say you're on the mark.
Well, women are different from sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but women are different from men. So don't. While someone else tactfully brought up this subject, let me chime in and say that it's. I think one thing that is a very common tired trope nowadays in modern literature and modern entertainment in general is the quote unquote strong female character. And unfortunately, what a lot of people mean by the strong female character is a man with boobs. Yep. And I think that they may think they're being liberating by making a woman who's violent, selfish, cussing, she's lecherous, all this other stuff that you commonly see in like a male action hero character. But I think they're actually selling women short by doing that. But they think like, so again,
they think that's the definition of strength.
Right. So to kind of dovetail with it again, you don't have to have action. It may not, your story may not be. It's not. If it's not a war story, it's not an action adventure. It doesn't have to open with action. I mean, there's and it may entirely not be right for your character, or what you're trying to do. And if I can get back to the original question was what books and stuff do you recommend, and piling right on top of that, I want to say I would actually caution people not to take every bit of writing advice you find too seriously, even from excellent authors. Now there are some like Lester Dent knew what he was doing, and he actually was able to tell in a sensical way how to write. And I think ArtAnon's right. His advice is right on. If you want to write that kind of pulp adventure literature, that's where you got to go for that. But there's a lot of people, and I draw the analogy with, say, professional athletes who are excellent at their sport. Like take Joe Morgan, for example. Joe Morgan was a terrific baseball player. Then he became an announcer, and you found out that, gee, this guy doesn't seem to know anything about baseball. And how did that happen? Because he was a terrific player. But, it's the same thing that, you can be really great in your field, but an awful teacher. So every successful writer is at some point asked to write a book about how to write. And a lot of them don't know what they're talking about. They may even tell you to do things that don't make sense or that are different from what they must have done. I think because they're just not, there's a distinction between teaching people how to do something and actually being good at it. And they're not always the same. So I would caution you, and there's 100,000 books on writing nowadays. And a lot of them make really stupid things that I disagree with, but that may actually work. They may be right. Like the advice I often hear is write at a 5th grade reading level. Now, I don't like that. I like reading books from the 1800s, very early 1900s, where there are words that even now I still have to look up what they mean. And I think that's the kind of literature I prefer. But you don't feel you have to dumb your story down either, because this very popular book on writing says make your book for semi-illiterate people. But with that in mind, the book I want to recommend is called, from the technical aspect, it's by James Scott Bell. It's called Write Your Novel from the Middle, a new approach for plotters, pantsers, and everyone in between. And the key point here is that it says there's like an inflection point. It's usually in the middle of a 3-act story in which you really know what the movie's about, or he uses movies as the example to translate into books, and you really know what the story's about at that point. And if you write that first, then all of a sudden your beginning and your end, and then the points in between become more interesting, and it's very clear what they're about. And another point that he brings up in the book that is extremely important as well is basically don't write stuff that bores you. And this is I don't know about anybody else, but I have a bit of a neurosis here that I actually will get really stuck on writing stuff that bores me. And I don't like elements of the story, not the story itself. I'll say, boy, I really want to write this scene, but I'm just not there yet. I have to slog through this other stuff. And one of the key points that it makes is if, you don't actually have to do it. Writing is not a form of penance. You don't have to make yourself suffer to do this. And the other thing is, if you, no matter how important you think it is, there may be things that are really important that you can toss off in just a sentence or two, and then you don't have to get into them. But that if you're writing something that you're not interested in, there's no way that you're going to be able to make it interesting enough for a reader to care about it. So don't bother.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I got nothing to add to that. That's
moment of silence for the good advice from that book.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, we used to have we used to talk, like, criticize each other when I was, in various bands, where it's like, if we're bored playing this song, imagine what the person in the audience is going to be thinking.
And a sensitive audience member, regardless of what the medium is, can always pick up. Think about you go to a movie, and you may be this movie should hit all the right points for you, but you can tell the actor's not having it. the actor doesn't believe it. The actor's kind of just phoning it in, and you can tell, you get that sense like, geez, this is it destroys your suspension of disbelief. You start, you yawn and you turn the channel. So I think that it's a lot of suffering needlessly, and you may think, I use the penance line, but that's something that actually, for whatever reason, I have this issue where, as I'm sitting down to write, I'm like, no, I have to write this really tedious scene to get something straight in my head, even if it doesn't matter, and even if I really don't want to write this now. And then sometimes I'll get stuck there and then not write the thing that I actually wanted to sit down and write in the first place.
Well, it's because you have a very well ordered mind.
I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but
I would. But I think that's an important thing that people don't. It's hard when you're a beginner writer to know. It's like, your character's alive 24/7. Presumably they sleep 8 hours of those days. So it's like, what of the other 16 hours do I have to include during a period of adventure?
And the answer to that is, in most cases, only a few minutes.
Right?
Yeah. It's like if nothing interesting is happening, you probably don't have to write about it. Like, I know I've actually had people say like, oh, I love this book because this book is so detailed. It's like, you follow the character for every meal, and you join them in the bathroom and everything. And
So it's Instagram?
Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like, that, if you like artistic literature, if you like literature that is trying to be art for art's sakes, good on you. But I like sci-fi and fantasy and adventure and things like that. So, you need to like assess it, and you need to say like, is this interesting? And if it's not.
For a while, there was a really bad piece of writing advice going around, and it went something like this. When you write dialogue that's very clear and very punchy, it's inferior to real life dialogue. And go out and talk to someone and listen for all the ums and the pauses and the fact that people they're not sure what they actually want to say, and there's lulls in the conversation. And really, if you want to get realism in your book, you need to have it in there. And that's absolutely awful advice. That's the worst. If I ever read even one page of something like that, I would put it down.
Realism is the death of a lot of entertainment, especially if it's based in science fiction or fantasy. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, even if it's a purely mundane, say, romance novel or something like that, if it's literary fiction, if you wrote something that was that quote unquote realistic, I don't think there's any entertainment value in it, and I don't think there's any artistic merit either, because it becomes a slog to go through. Like, none of that stuff is important. We deal with it in real life because we have to, but not in a book.
True, and I think
can make it.
Go ahead, Alex.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that those pauses, those interruptions, like we're hearing right now, are right. Yes, they're real. However, if you're writing that, you're confusing the reader. So why are they confused? Is it a stutter they have? Is it they're thinking on their feet? What is it really happening here? Whereas if you have a pause that's placed in an entertaining novel, you're usually telegraphing, this is what the pause means. Oh, she's pausing because she doesn't want to tell the main character that she's really in love with him, and if she goes too far, she'll do that. She'll spill that out. So she shifts gears and moves on to something else. The reader will pick up on that in most cases if the writer's doing their job, and the reader is entertained. You've given the reader a little bit of a snap into what's going on in the one character's mind versus the other character still hasn't figured it out yet. Mm-hmm. So you've invested the reader in many respects by using that common pause in an artistic manner.
Mm-hmm. And like the sad thing is, if you're constantly trying to inject that in there, just for the sake of it. In reality, the reason I might be pausing is because I'm thinking about what dinner is going to be tonight. That's not helping a story there.
The example of that I think a lot of English teachers love, and I know my 12th grade English teacher loved this and forced me to read this book, even though she actually gave us an extra book to read during the year because I had not yet been forced to read this book. And it was The Sound and the Fury. And the first chapter is written from the perspective of a literally retarded kid. He's not a kid. I guess he's like an adult, but he's like he has severe mental handicap, and there's no punctuation. It's like all big one big run-on sentence, and it's stream of consciousness, so it goes in and out. And that was considered high art. I don't know. Maybe there's people that disagree. That's okay if you really love William Faulkner and you think that's great. But when I read that, I was like, this is trash. I have no idea what's going on here, and I really it gave me a headache to read it, and I don't think it's very good.
Subtitle signifying nothing.
Exactly, and that's why it was called that too. But
wow, that's just telegraphing main point, I guess.
I was going to say, did you have something you wanted to say before, Alex?
Yeah, ArtAnon actually he kind of was getting to the point about the realistic dialogue and the pauses and all that I had, which was you can use those idiosyncrasies in speech to a certain effect, but you have to use it very sparingly. Maybe you have one character who mumbles or who always trails off and never finishes a thought, or another one, like you said, with a stuttering problem, and you can use that. You can use those tendencies that you have in a quote unquote realistic conversation, maybe to character build or just to distinguish. That could be a speech pattern of one of your characters, but if everybody is talking like that, no, I completely agree with your first point, Mike, and you too, Shell, that it's just, it makes you want to just either smash your head against the wall or throw the book against the wall.
Let me tag one more thing onto that too. I think this is, I'll go back to art again. I think this is one of the big differences that you start seeing between movie storyboarding and comic books. And some people who are really learning how to do comic books from movies, I think, get caught up in more of a storyboard that I need to show every variation in scene. And in writing, I'll start seeing that too, especially with modern writing, where it's like, well, we're not going to listen to the character. We're going to just get that verbal, and we'll have to figure out what they're really thinking in their head. I think that's such a horrible methodology. I'm sorry it's become common, but the idea that you show every scene, tell every detail, walk your reader through every event is so boring that you're never going to entertain anybody that way. That's one of the reasons for me. I really do draw a big distinction between storyboarding and comic art, because the storyboarding really is designed to tell the director, the actors, how we're going to flow from one shot to the next. It's important in the making of a film. It's really critical. But the comic book medium, much like figuring out how to write well, is supposed to pick out those critical scenes and those camera shots and present them in a condensed format. My goal is not to tell a 2-hour movie in 500 pages. I'm going to tell a 2-hour movie in 20 pages.
There's also something to say with that in terms of productivity and wasting your own time. If you go into over detail, if you spend a lot of time on scenes that aren't important, if you make a story that could be told in 250 pages, 500 pages, you also could have written and released 2 books.
Right.
There's a very famous author, and I'm forgetting who it is now, and I don't want to say who I think it is because I'm probably wrong and embarrass myself, right? But he was known for writing novels, like really extremely critically revered novels. And he said, I hate novels. And really, he said, I really admire not to throw shade on anybody. I know we all have novels here, right? So, but he said that he really appreciates a short story writer because they just get on with it, and that most novels he's read, including his own. He said, "Geez, I could cut half of it out and it wouldn't matter." So now, that may be taking it a bit too far, but there is, I think, there's a certain expectation. As ArtAnon mentioned, maybe taking from other media which are more popular now, like movies, that you have to spell all this out because, well, you can't show the inner workings of a person's mind on a movie the same way you can in a book or a comic. And in comics, as he mentioned, there used to be thought bubbles, and now they hardly ever do thought bubbles anymore. So everything has to, instead what they think, they think thought bubbles are stupid. So instead, let me have this really, really tedious, completely unbelievable conversation in words that people would never really have to explain the plot.
I think also that highlights, and Alex, you may have talked about it in your blog. I know Brian has talked about it. I think that's the power of writing. It is such a compact means of delivering a story. The short story and the novel are really, in many respects, the most powerful means to deliver entertainment. And then we almost have I know we've talked about this too, but a decomposition as you move to the movie in some respects. I'm limited on my time, but I'm going to try and expand out into 2 hours some semblance of what was in a book.
Right. Yeah.
This reminds me too of something I read in Shell's art books, in the Andrew Loomis books, and she can probably phrase it better. But Andrew Loomis talks about how the drawing is not photography, and though you will look at things in real life and you will look at pictures, it's important that the most important thing an artist, an illustrator can do, is not faithfully reproduce everything, because one of the most powerful techniques of the illustrator is omission. You can focus in on what's important, not the entire thing. Where the human mind, when the eye perceives everything around us, most of the details fade into the background, because we perceive what's important. But if you're trying to copy everything, and this is sort of the I think the artistic and the illustration analogy of what we just talked about, of explaining everything, of putting in all the step-by-step stuff, you overwhelm the picture, you drown it in detail, you lose the impact and power of what you should actually be focusing on.
Right.
Yeah. It ends up becoming like a dance manual. There's this author I like to follow. His name is I think he's from Spain. His name is Xavier Lastra. His blog, it's called Emperor Ponders. He writes this more. He writes on that same point. He tends to use it with regards to action scenes, battle scenes, but talks about how the types of battle scenes he likes and action scenes he likes to read and write are the ones that really give the essence. They give the important parts. They're punchy, they're bold, they feel like they're moving, and they don't read like you're looking at the choreography for how Errol Flynn and Basil Rathbone might have fought in the Robin Hood movie. It's not a how-to guide, but a lot of action scenes tend to read like that. And like what ends up happening is you lose the magic of prose when you try to imitate a movie or a TV show in that regard.
Yeah, every artistic medium is a little different. You can't directly copy from one medium into another and expect to even be successful at doing it, let alone to have the same impact.
In fact, I'm going to do the geeky scientist here. You've almost described, or I think pieces of these conversations have almost described, an arrow of time relative to decomposition. The most compact, and in my mind, I'll qualify this, the most compact method of delivering entertainment is the written word. Whether it's short story, novel, whatever it happens to be. We move into written word plus visual in the most abbreviated format we can. We move into abbreviated word plus visual in an expanded format, storyboard, and then we move into movies. For examples, I can move from book to any of the ones along the arrow and figure out how I can condense the information. Not condense it, but cull information, pick out information, and make it appropriate to that medium. I can't go backwards as efficiently. I've already lost the information as I move towards the arrowhead, so I can't take a movie and try to novelize it. We've all read novelizations of movies, and I'm betting that in almost all cases they're less than stellar relative to someone who's written a book that might be along the same topic.
Right. I agree. Yeah. So you're talking about lossless compression, to put it from information science. So if I can interject my own my own expertise in here, but yeah. So you have you've lost some of the detail has to go away,
right?
In order for the movie to work. So to work backwards, you can't recover it.
And entropy and information science, it's all the same. So hey, it's good.
Interesting thought. Yeah.
We're close to the 1 hour 20 mark, so I'm gonna say, okay, ArtAnon, you don't have a novel, but to break off and start winding this down, I'm gonna say to, do we have you, Alex?
Yeah, you should.
Okay. I'm going to ask Alex and Mike what 2 books they would recommend someone who wants to get into writing read. And I want one of the books to be yours, because that's how we do things on this channel.
Oh, no, that's tough. I wish you wouldn't have sprung that on me.
Do you want me to go first, Mike? Or?
Yes, please give me time to think about this one.
Well, okay. So if one of the books has to be mine, I would actually recommend The Last Ancestor, because that's a bit more conventional than my first book was, and it's sort of it dovetails into the book I'm going to recommend next. So The Last Ancestor is kind of my love letter to sci-fi mixed with some fantasy, but Sword and Planet especially. And I will say that I would recommend you read A Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's a book that's over a century old, but it has so many elements of what you would consider sci-fi tropes now. I think Burroughs, he doesn't waste a lot of time with pointless jibber-jabber. He kind of just gets right to the action. Even when he's describing the aliens and their culture, usually there's some kind of fight going on, which is awesome. It's got freaky aliens. And I don't know, that book, it blew my mind when I read it about 2 years ago. And I think if you would like to get into writing sci-fi fantasy type stuff that is different from what you would read a lot now from a lot of the traditional big publishing houses, but has influenced so many of the great writers, I would recommend that. And if I can throw in an extra bookshelf, just
Absolutely.
because I read it recently, I would also recommend you read Captain Blood by Raphael Sabatini. It's a pirate story, and they made an awesome movie of it back in the 30s, but I really recommend the book. You want to talk about a writer that gets right to the action while still having plot and character development. I can't think of a better book I've read recently that's been written in the last 100 years or so that does a better job than Captain Blood. And you can get both of those free on Gutenberg.org if you're, if you like to read something before you buy it. Highly recommend those.
Awesome. And I can at least say Princess of Mars is a good choice. I haven't checked out the other one myself.
I think it's great that you recommended public domain novels too, because anything from the anything that's old enough to have fallen out of copyright are among my favorites. They're pretty much the only books I read.
Yeah, they're so good. They're so good.
Oh, Mike, you're up.
Oh, geez, if I have to recommend any one book of mine, well, I recommend them all, but the as far as I think the height of one of the things we talked about is telling a story with in the minimum space and getting all the stuff. I think the best one I can recommend for that is House of Refuge. It was it's a award-winning short story that I wrote back in 2014. It's about a rescue service caught in the middle of a war at sea, and it's like 8,000 or 9,000 words. And I was actually writing it for a short story contest, so I had to keep it there. But there's I had to be spare with the, in the amount of space I had. They have a lot of action, a lot of story, a lot of emotional weight, and also a good payoff in that. And I think I was pretty successful in that. For another book geez, that's really tough. I was going to say like anything by Arthur Conan Doyle, but if I have to be specific, I would say I'd actually going to recommend a more modern book called The Drawing of the Dark by Tim Powers. It's a novel that reads like a pulp short story. I'm looking at it now. It's 300 some pages, but it's got everything. It's got an alternate a quasi alternate historical fiction, a secret history of the world, supernatural conspiracy, lots of swashbuckling sword fighting, demons, gods, magic, and the fate of Western civilization itself, all wrapped up in this really compact format. Like I said, it's a full-length novel, but it reads like a really punchy, adventurous short story. That's one of my favorite books.
Wow, sounds like I got to check that out.
I was gonna let Mike. I was gonna let Mike's answer be my answer, but he actually picked the one book I didn't contribute any writing to.
Sorry, Shell. Nothing personal.
Right. That's all right. But I'll pop my answer in later so as not to bore everyone, and also to give myself time to think about it, because I own the channel and I could do that.
Yeah, geez, thanks for giving yourself time to think about it.
All right, guys, let's.
Can I just ask one question of Alex before we go?
Absolutely.
All right. So the dog and I started reading The Last Ancestor, and I know this sounds like a lame excuse, but I have four Kindle Paperwhites, and as I was reading it and I put it down and I haven't found it again. So that's why I haven't finished it. That's kind of how messy our home environment is.
Oh, that's fine.
But the intelligent dog race.
Yes.
Are they at all inspired by the Vargur from Traveller?
No, I actually never played Traveller.
Okay.
That they were inspired because I had this is going to sound bizarre, but a while before I started writing that book, I had a dream about a kid, like a teenager and an alien, just exploring a rocky planet, and that was what the alien looked like. He kind of looked doggish, and I just kind of played the idea in my head about, what if you had man's best friend, but they kind of become an enemy of humans, except for this one that becomes friends with the main character. But no, that sounds right up my alley though, because I don't own a dog, but I'm a big dog lover. So
I thought that was great because I'm a dog lover too, and we have 2 dogs now. We used to have even more, but I always liked the idea that, like for instance, Chewbacca was based on when George Lucas was originally writing the script for Star Wars, Chewbacca was basically his dog. And then over time it became a Wookiee. And I thought, boy, someone needs to write a story, and you did it certainly, where the adventurer has his actual dog, but his dog can talk and is sentient.
Yeah, I like dogs. No, I'll have to check out Traveller though. What are they called? The Vargush?
Vargur, Vargr.
Okay, Vargr. Cool.
Oh, and ArtAnon, if you did want to throw a book out there, you certainly can. I know you don't have anything you've written out there right now.
Well, I'll give you a couple options here. One of them is Anthony Hope's Prisoner of Zenda. That one is so easily convertible to a graphic novel. I know it's been done several times, but a wonderful action adventure book, and it's probably one of the first ones that were written in the action adventure style. Then I'll throw an author at you, and one of my favorite science fiction authors is H. Beam Piper. His Tarot Human Future History was phenomenal to me when I was growing up. I don't know how I got locked into it, but he's written a lot of short stories, a couple of novels, Space Viking, 4-Day Planet, some stories, The Cosmic Computer, Polar Uprising, and if you've heard of Little Fuzzy, that's probably his most well-regarded intro story or intro novel to the Fuzzies. You've got to read it to understand it, but lots of action, lots of adventure, punchy, snappy, pulpy writing. And the nice thing is, almost all available on Gutenberg.
Love it. Love it.
Well, you know we're big on the public domain in this channel. Someone trying to say something there?
Nope,
I
not
think
me.
nope.
A little bit of
All right.
feedback, I think.
Okay, let's just run down and do the saying goodbye and where we can find you. So, Alex?
This has been an absolute pleasure, everyone. This is just a blast. I wish we could go longer, but I know we all have lives. So thank you. And if anybody wants to find me, I have a blog called Amatopia. It's at amatopia.wordpress.com. And I have a Twitter account. It's at Hellene author. And you can also just find me on Amazon. That does it. And thanks. Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely great to have you on here. Mike, do you want to do us?
Sure. You can find our stuff on heroicadventurefiction.com. That's exactly like it sounds. And you can actually read our books as we upload them week by week in installments for free there. Shell is also on DeviantArt, and she's on Instagram and lots of other things. I am not on Twitter. I am permanently banned from Twitter, so you will not be able to find me on there. Shell, if you want to give the DeviantArt account.
I'm Shell Presto on almost everything. One word, no spaces. And ArtAnon?
Well, I've got a half-finished website, ArtAnonStudios.com, that will have some more added to it eventually. I've got a gallery up there, at least, of some of the folks, images from some of the folks I've been working for. Alex is one of them.
Yeah, and I've been posting. I still have a couple more pieces to post on the blog, but anybody listening to this, you can see the pictures that ArtAnon has drawn, and Shell has colored a lot of them too from The Last Ancestors. Just like they look even cooler than I imagined them.
Yeah, I was going to say you can find just the illustrations on ArtAnon's site, and you can actually you post them with character bios and everything, so you can get a taste of what the characters of your book are like on Amatopia.
Yep, that's right.
All right, great chat, everyone. Glad you guys could all be here, and Presto and the gang over and out.
That was great. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Happy to do it.
Thank you. I got to run out and
You thought I forgot about answering my own question, but I did not. Obviously, I had the luxury of taking time to think about it, but here are my recommendations. And because I'm the host, I'm going to recommend 2 of my books as well as 2 of other people's books as well, because I can. So a story should be as long as a story should be. If that's a 1,000-page space epic, then that's a 1,000-page space epic. But I think it also helps to look at shorter work as well. And I am a huge fan of short stories. Most of my favorite authors write shorter fiction. So yeah, the stories that I would recommend most are from other authors. This is Manly Wade Wellman's Who Fears the Devil? It's the Complete Tales of Silver John. And Manly Wade Wellman's stories are his best stories, I think, are short and punchy, but they also certainly run the gamut. And the Silver John stories are really exceptional because, let's see here. He does everything from stories that are a half page to stories that are, there's quite a few 10-pagers in here and stuff. So, there's another one that's like a half page. But his work is really exceptional too, because he does a wonderful job coming up with descriptions for things that you wouldn't expect them to be described as, and also he does a lot of colloquial speak in his books. Similarly, Richard Matheson. Now, Richard Matheson is probably best known for, let's see, I Am Legend, Perhaps What Dreams May Come, and also the Gremlin story. I can't remember what it is, but it's the Twilight Zone episode where there's a gremlin on the wing of a plane, and you also see them spoofed in Looney Tunes a lot, actually, the same story. But the thing about I Am Legend is it's a long book. It's 170 pages, but that's like short by novel standards. It's actually a novella. So for most of Richard Matheson's books, they actually pair it, you'll see here, with a bunch of short stories to bring the page count up. So I Am Legend says here 160 pages. And then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 additional pages that are stories that are thrown in here to fill out the count. And the thing I really like about Richard Matheson is that, we'll say about I Am Legend, because actually I don't think The Incredible Shrinking Man has the same feel as I Am Legend. But I Am Legend particularly, it has the same energy as a short story. It's just more filled out with more details and following along. And it's interesting to compare what he includes and what he doesn't include between his novella in here and his short stories. And it's also interesting to see how Richard Matheson is known for his twist endings. He wrote Twilight Zone episodes and everything too. It's interesting to see the shortest story in here is 3 pages, and it has, it's a little more predictable, but, it still has the same sharp ending that I Am Legend, the novella itself, has. So I think those are 2 great books by other authors. What am I going to recommend from the Ascension Epoch Library? That was a hard thing for me too, and it's not... The reason it's hard for me is because the same way that I compare I Am Legend to the shorter stories in I Am Legend, we have two books that follow 2 different formats here. The first one is After Dark, and I like to liken it to Manly Wade Wellman type stories. I'm not saying... they don't have the same flavor. This is downwoods West, down in the backwoods West Virginia, and it's very, very back country. This is very Pittsburgh, so it's city, but a particular city. Pittsburgh often can feel a little backwoods, but in After Dark, actually, I think every story in After Dark is a short story, and they're interconnected. And I thought it is a pretty good example of how to put it. I think it's a good example of what not to include. Days go by between stories, but we do a good job of moving from action or heavy character development back to action. So even though a lot of time passes in the book, we don't get bogged down in that. We keep it moving. And then, as I was saying, in comparison, like with the I Am Legend compared to short stories, our novella Copper Knights and Granite Men is a good example of what you can, of keeping the action moving. Copper Knights and Granite Men is, I jotted it down here. The whole book is a little over 100 pages, but the actual story is right around 70 pages. You may know, or you may not know, we include appendixes in the back of our books. And, we include some really fun stuff like fake magazine articles so you can get to know the characters better, and, letters that the Promethean was exchanging with Sherlock Holmes and interesting things like that. So we always load up the back of our books with some fun stuff like that when we can. But, Copper Knights and Granite Men is a quick 70-page adventure, but it, introduces 6 main characters that you'll be seeing again. We cram a lot of action in there, but we also cram a lot of characterization without going into backstory. And I think it's a good example of that. So those are my books that I recommend. I hope you folks enjoyed the whole format of this video. Having guests on is a new thing for me, and I certainly thought having guests on would be interesting for you guys, so please let me know in the comments what you think. Do give Alexander Hellene's website, amatopia.wordpress.com, and also his book a look, because they're interesting stuff. And please excuse the mess on my desk, because I was drawing and need to get back to that. You guys have an awesome day. Presto, over and out.
Farewell and adieu to you, fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu to you, ladies of Spain.